Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are in the world. And thank you for joining us today for the McGill Leadership Impact Series. My name is Ron Dirksen, and I'm the Global Executive Director of the International Master's Program for Managers. We affectionately call the IMPM. It's a global executive program with 5 academic partners around the world, and it was founded by Professor Henry Mintzberg over 25 years ago, with the objective of transforming the practice of management around the world. And Professor Mintzberg's vision, if you know him, is based on the premise that leadership is management with lasting impact. And so in that spirit, we've launched and this is a series of monthly interactive webinars, which are focused on ways that management and leadership can have a lasting positive influence in our world. So today we're very honored and pleased to welcome Stephen Hecht. Stephen is co-founder and chief executive Peacemaker of Million Peacemakers. Steve brings over 30 years of personal and business experience to the field of conflict resolution and is the co-author of the best-selling book, Nonflict, The Art of Everyday Peacemaking. Million Peacemakers is a nonprofit organization which empowers people to transform conflict into nonflict. And Steve will talk to us a little bit today about that, give you a little introduction into what that means. Over 230,000 people around the world have been trained to date in the Nonflict method, with a focus on youth and families and businesses, and over 8 million people have been impacted by this program. Steve is winner of the Canada Award for Business Excellence and the YMCA Peace. He has served in leadership positions with the Young Presidents Organization at the regional and international levels, with a focus on education. He is the co-chair and the highest rated YPO Innovation Weeks event in 2019 and is the chair of the Peace Action Network and vice chair of the Impact Council, including Peace, People, Planet, and Sustainable Business. He is also the co-chair of the 2024 Impact Summit in Rwanda. The Vatican invited Steve to speak to religious leaders on how to use nonflict to make an impact on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. He was then invited back to address the working group advising the Pope on peace and nonviolence. Just so you know, an Alexa virtual nonflict coach is now available for you to download. Steve has an MBA from Ivy Business School, Western University, Canada, and a BCom, Bachelor of Commerce from McGill University. Steve, as someone who graduated with an MBA at McGill, and not a BCom, I do always say a BCom at McGill is worth 4 MBAs anywhere else. So thank you, Steve, for joining us. You're a valued alum of McGill, but also someone who has worked globally and has had enormous impact on society. And so I just want to thank you for joining us today. Just a little bit about how we're going to run this session. It's about an hour. We'll begin with Steve talking about a few ideas and concepts for about 25 minutes. There will be a few poll questions, and Jess, who's helping me here today, will post the poll questions, which we invite you to answer during Steve's presentation. Then we will put you all in breakout rooms for just 7 minutes in groups of 2 for a little nonflict exercise. And then we'll reconvene together for 20 minutes for you all to share your experience from these breakout sessions and have a little discussion with Steve. So welcome, Steve. Thank you very much for leading us in today's, and I leave the screen to you.
Great. Well, thank you, Ron. Thank you, Jess, and everyone for being here today. And it's truly an honor to be back with people from around the world, from McGill and elsewhere. And I've really enjoyed traveling. Actually, I know a lot of you are international and affiliated with some of these universities. And in the last month, I've been to Brazil and India, and in 2019 to the UK and Japan, who are represented here. So today is meant to be interactive. I know we have a short window of an hour. Often we do this workshop in 3 hours. We'll see how far we get. All righty. So a little bit of background on Nonflict. It was created by Dr. Amir Kafir for a YPO event when I was the chair of education for the Canadian region. YPO was a group of 34,000 CEOs from around the world in 130 odd countries. And Nonflict includes imago marriage therapy, positive psychology, change management, and coaching in a step-by-step process in order to resolve any conflict, from an internal conflict to an identity-based conflict. And that was the goal when I wanted to do an event on conflict resolution, mostly because I've had a lot of conflict in my life, and the negotiation theory and practices that I had in business were not necessarily ideal for longer-term relationships. So I'm happily married, by the way, to another McGill alum. We met at our 25th year reunion. And Naomi is my third wife, so I also have a fair amount of experience with personal conflict before Naomi, who we're married with now 13 years. And we've trained about 235,000 people directly in 6 years, impacting about 8 million people since we started. Many of you are in business. I think most of you are in business, and you realize the cost of destructive conflict. With over 85% of employees experiencing conflict. This is pre-COVID. The numbers post-COVID are higher than that. And the average manager spends about 25% of their time dealing with conflict. And if we don't have the skills to deal with it effectively, it's certainly not ideal, because it can lead to poor morale, poor productivity, and we know turnover, because people are more likely to leave their manager than for any other reason. Again, because you're in business, I'll just share with you the strategic positioning for our nonprofit, which is Million Peacemakers, which is for those who desire peace. Million Peacemakers enables global transformation by reframing conflict into nonflict. This is for an internal strategic positioning. So our business is global transformation, and our tool is nonflict. And our target market is anyone who desires peace. We don't bother with people that don't desire peace. We figure about 90% of the population do desire it. Since starting, Ron mentioned I've been to the Vatican twice. That's Cardinal Turkson, who was the cardinal in charge of peace. We worked with youth. We're very focused on the youth in the world right now. So we've, from around the world in Africa, Central America, collaborating with a program called Sport is Your Gang. Bottom middle is the YPO chapter in Puerto Rico, and then YMCA in the bottom right. And that's just a small sampling of where we've been. I'd like to share a survey now in the chat button. If you could just take a minute. Oh, that is not the survey. I apologize. I did a copy paste from another. Let me just get the survey link. Give me 1 second. That's for an event we're doing in LA. There we go. That's the survey. You could just do that form over there. It'll take you 1 minute. It's an opening survey.
Sorry, would you mind sending the link again?
Okay, I just give me 1 second. The link is going to be in the chat. There you go. Do you see that in the chat?
Got it. Thanks.
And Ron mentioned the link is not working. So if it's not working for you, I don't know if it's not working for others, put in the chat if it's not working. And we're not ready for the posting of the poll, Jess. I'll tell you when to post that. Put in the chat if the link is not, it works if you try it a few times. Okay, thank you for sharing. It works for Mark. Okay, thank you. Good to know it's not a dead link. Great. And after you've completed the survey, I'd like you to think about a conflict that you have and how it makes you feel, and put in the chat the feelings that come about. And I'm going to share a feeling wheel. For some people have a hard time identifying feelings. So put in the chat, how does conflict make you feel? When you're in conflict, what are your feelings around that? Put that in the chat as well. Energized, interesting, uncomfortable, anxious, yeah. Fearful, thank you. Isolated, anxious and worried. Thanks, Ramon. Nervous. By the way, sharing is caring. Thank you for sharing in the chat. That's great. So conflict is certainly emotional, able to contribute. And often we identify negative feelings toward conflict. If you had to define conflict, how would you define it? Yes, draining. Yes. How would you define conflict? What is conflict? Put that in the chat. Yeah. Opportunity for change. Yes. Emotion. Impasse, negotiation, misunderstanding, different views, not being constructive, divergent point of view. Awesome. Great. And you're all right, by the way. There's conflict over the definition of conflict. You look it up. So we tried to come up with a simple definition because I like things simple, which is when two or more different perspectives come into contact with each other. So is this glass half full or half empty? By definition, and we're looking at the same glass, by definition, two or more different perspectives, it's neither positive or negative, but how we deal with conflict is either going to be constructive or destructive. And we need constructive conflict for innovation, for growth. We need two or more different perspectives for that. So the purpose of our workshop is to give people tools to deal with conflict in a constructive way. And one of the key skills we need in constructive conflict is active listening. I know many of you know active listening. I taught active listening actually in organizational behavior with my wife back in the late 70s, so it's nothing new. Yet sometimes we know something, we don't necessarily apply it. Anyone know what active listening is? You can put it in the chat. Being present, thanks. Listening without judgment. So one of the things we need in active listening is eye contact. Yes, thank you. Listening attentively with compassion, empathy, repeating what we heard. Yes, great. Thanks. And in order to do that, eye contact is important. And we're talking gentle eye contact. In certain cultures, we know we're international here. We look at the third eye. In certain cultures, looking directly in the eyes might be a sign of aggression. So gentle eye contact. And how does it make you feel if you're talking to someone and you're serious about it? They're looking away, they're looking at their phone. How does it make you feel? They're looking at their shoes, they're looking anywhere else but you, and you're talking to them. How does it make you feel? Thanks, not respected, undervalued, ignored. You guys are quick. Like they're not taking you seriously. And feeling disrespected, as Ron mentioned, by the way, is the source of over 90% of the conflicts out there when you think about it. And that could be at a personal level to a geopolitical level. There are wars started more often than not when the leader feels disrespected by the person he goes to, or he or she goes to war with. Actually, very few she's go to war with people. But yeah, thanks, it makes you feel dismissed. So gentle eye contact, having open ears, be able to hear the other person without distraction. You probably don't want to engage in a conflict or a serious discussion when it's very loud in a loud restaurant, or when you're getting dinged by your phone every 5 seconds. Having an open mind. Often we have a closed mind when we're in conflict. We think we're right and they're wrong. Being open to another point of view. And finally, having an open heart, having empathy for the other person. Realizing that they have emotions too. And by actively listening to them, it doesn't mean that you're agreeing with them. It doesn't mean you're giving up your point of view just to listen. But just actively listening is enough to diffuse most conflicts. So if there's one thing you can practice right away is actively listening. and then mirroring, someone mentioned earlier, then to mirror back the essence of what they said, not like a parrot. I know some people learn active listening and you mirror back word by word by word that they've said. But here, if you actually listen and then put it into your own words and then ask, did I understand you well? Asking for clarification. But we're going to try it. We're going to do an exercise, which you're going to do after in the breakout room. And actually, Ron is going to help me. And we did not rehearse this, so Ron doesn't know what I'm going to share. I'm going to share an event or person that had a major impact in my life, including facts and feelings. So you're going to think of an event or person that had a major impact in your life, including facts and feelings, for about 60 seconds. And the other person is going to mirror back the essence of what you said and then ask, did I understand you well? Right? And if they didn't understand you well, you'll clarify. Okay, Ron, you ready to try this with me?
I'll try, yeah.
All right, so an event or person. Okay, actually it'll be an event and a person. So growing up, I was in a family business, and my father was the fourth of 5 sons in the family business. The eldest son was my Uncle Jack. He was the president of the company. He had no kids of his own, and he took me under his arm. Since I was a little kid, actually, bought me a first computer before computers were computers, and would take me to events. And when I was old enough, taught me about business and life, and I felt I was able to relate to him in many ways, actually more than my own father. I was second year McGill, and that's why I'm thinking of this, because we're talking about McGill, second year McGill, and I was 20 years old, and I get a call one night. My uncle had taken my grandparents to see our stores in Vancouver, and they were doing a road trip down to California. My grandfather's on the phone, and he says, Jack is dead. He died of a heart attack in front of my grandparents, and I'm all alone at my house. It's night. My parents were at a movie. I had to deal with the police, had to deal with my grandparents, and figure things out. And the next day we went to my uncle's apartment and found his will, my father and we found that he had left me the ability, by controlling interest in my family business, ahead of my father, 2 uncles, cousins, and siblings. And I had a lot of conflict thrown at me at that point, because they felt, who am I, a 20-year-old, my father and uncles had worked in the business all their lives, that I'd be able to control the company ultimately. And I did not have the tools to deal with conflict at that time. So I became very stoic. I just shut off my emotions because I didn't know how to deal with it. So I became very, very serious. And I just dealt with life. And some people said I was an asshole, especially my family. And anyway, so that event certainly had a major impact in my life.
So, Steve, if I understand your personal story correctly, you grew up in a family where your father was part of the family business, but he was, I guess, fourth in line. Your uncle, I think the oldest brother of your father, was the primary leader in the business and maybe primary shareholder. And you built a very close relationship with him, um, and saw him as I guess, a mentor. And you really shared a bond together. You said probably more than your father himself. Um, and well, I think while you were probably in your 20s, you got a call from your grandfather saying that your Uncle Jack was dead, um, and you know had to deal with all the things related to his death and help your grandparents cope with this. And in going through his affairs, you found his will and realized that he had left the lion's share of the business to you directly, bypassing uh, your Uncle Jack's other siblings and actually
So
giving
Ron, I'm
you
going to stop you because you're actively listening traditionally. Just put in 2 sentences what you got from me, facts and feelings.
Okay. See? Well, the
And even
essence
if I
of it
didn't
is, I
use those
guess,
words in your own words, what facts and feelings did you get from me in 2 sentences? Maybe
facts
3.
and feelings. Okay.
Yeah.
So, basically, you ended up a controlling share of the business, and this made you get into conflict with a lot of people in your family because you were not designated to take over the business, and that you developed a stoic personality, and that some people considered you an asshole.
Now ask, do I understand you well?
Do I understand you well?
You did. And
Did
what
I?
feelings, and now what feelings do you maybe get from my body language, or did you instill, then ask if I felt that way, and then ask, did I understand you well?
So, Steve, did you feel a certain amount of anxiety while talking about this story? Are you asking me to say how you feel now or how you felt then?
So if you heard what I told you, what feelings did you get out of me? And then ask to understand you all from my story.
In general, I think that it was a painful period for you. You dealt with it, like you said, in a stoic way. And it seems to me, but I don't know, it seems to me like we've gotten to a point where you're past that because you said, I used to be considered an asshole. So I'm assuming that, and maybe in listening, we shouldn't be assuming, but I'm assuming that you've gotten past that somehow.
And you're okay to assume and ask, did I understand you all? So you're asking for clarification because you are using your own judgment by what you got from me. And that's all right, because you're then asking to understand you all, and I could correct it. And
So
you are correct. And thank you for sharing. Yeah, I'm maybe no, some people might think I'm an asshole, but maybe fewer than before.
from what I've been exposed to, Steve, I would not consider you an asshole today.
You're very thanks. Alrighty. So this is a little harder than what you might have. But thank you, Ron, for doing that. And here's Ron. So thanks for demonstrating what is maybe a different kind of active listening than you might have been taught, if you've been taught this before. So we're not acting like a parrot. We're actually paraphrasing in a few sentences and then asking, including facts and feelings, and asking, did I understand you well? All right. And if you didn't, then the other person will clarify. So you're all going to go into breakout rooms, but first, any questions on the exercise? So you're each going to have a turn to share an event or a person that had a major impact in your life, including facts and feelings. The other person is going to mirror the essence and ask to understand you well. Then you're going to switch. Any questions on the exercise? I'll just look in the chat. Any questions before we start? Yeah, 2 people, it'll be 7 minutes. So you could just start with a quick introduction to yourself, and then before you get in. But I want to reiterate, what you share in the room is of a personal nature, is confidential. It won't be shared outside. You won't be asked to share anything outside, and please keep it confidential. It's a safe space to share to whatever extent you are comfortable to do it. Yes, and ideally, yes, share your camera so you can make that eye contact. To the extent you have a camera that you could share, that would be great. Alrighty, so please open the rooms, Jessica, and let's start. Great, are we all back? Coming back. I'm sorry if some of us were cut off in the middle of a sentence. These exercises could go on minutes longer, especially once we got talking and sharing. Did anyone share how it felt without giving away any confidential information that was shared with you? How did it feel to feel listened to? And now you could just either put in the chat or speak up. How did it feel to be listened to? I don't see everyone, so Ron, maybe you could call on people. Okay, now I put it on my grid view. Anyone want to share how it felt to be listened to? Or surprisingly good? Thank you, Matthew. Relief. My favorite. Yeah. Great. Yes, Marco, go ahead.
Yes, whenever you're being listened to, you feel good because there's someone that's interested in you. So it felt good talking about things, even though they were conflictual for me, but now talking about something that was in the past is a positive thing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Now, this wasn't about a conflict. Could be any event or person had a major impact in your life. Thank you. Who else has your hand up? Because I think the hand went down. Okay, great. Okay.
Sorry, it was me.
Shivagami, go ahead. Shivagami, you could unmute yourself. You had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes. After listening, you feel like helping if you are really an adventurous in person, if you are a risk taker, if you're understanding the importance of the universe is good, it's called helping in the nature.
By listening. So you feel you're helping, and you feel you're helping yourself as well?
That's right, because I learned as a psychology person, BA in psychology, one of my professor, she herself went to suicide. As a student, I went to several times to bring to the schools and colleges. For 5 years, I went on picking her up, bringing up. What was going on in her means it was, she couldn't walk. And only thing, it was a sensitive organs of, and she was a professor, and she could give the teaching and voice it. So that gave me to do this further and further risk-taking management.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. And how did it feel? And maybe we'll put in the chat just from a time perspective. How did it feel to also feel listened to? So we talked about how to feel to listen, how to feel to be listened to as well. Great. And we see comforting for some. So we see the power, and this is something that we could do right away, right? You could do it right now. Framing is a concept that's important when we're in conflict, especially to keep in mind that there are about 8 billion people in the world, and we all have a different lens through which we see facts, right? And it's based on our culture, personality, education, life experience. They all affect how we see things. And often when we're in conflict, we wonder, why don't they see it our way? It's because they have different framing than you and I. So something to keep in mind whenever we are in conflict. One of the ways of dealing with conflict, and actually the person in the breakout room with me mentioned that this was her go-to way, is to flee from conflict. But what are the pros and cons of avoiding or fleeing from conflict? You could put in the chat. Just avoid it. Thanks, Sarah. No resolution. Doesn't get resolved. Yeah, we're hearing that. Eventually it catches up to you. Yeah, you might avoid, and keeps you up at night, and then one could explode with anger and, dealing with it inappropriately. And yes, Grace, it's a good point. It gives time to think. So avoiding, taking time in the heat of the moment to reflect on it, to think about it, isn't necessarily avoiding it. It's actually a good practice. Have time to reflect what got triggered here, so then I could deal with it. Great. Using force and power to deal with conflict. Do it or else. In management, or else I'll fire you, or I'll quit, or geopolitically, I'll bomb you, I'll nuke you. Or in a relationship, I'll leave you. What are the pros and cons of using force or power to deal with conflict? Obviously, it doesn't have to be physical force. Yes, someone, usually the person who's who's the victim of force, doesn't feel very happy about it. It's a short-term solution. It might be quick if you've got the power, but it may not be sincere. Clearly, it probably not. And you feel bullied. And how does it feel to be bullied? What happens when you feel bullied? In a company, how does it feel to be bullied? Are you being motivated to work for that supervisor, that manager, that leader? Yeah. It is demoralizing. Shut down, feeds to low self-esteem. Yeah, lots of abandonment, betrayal. So lots of cons of using force or power. Folding, just give the other person what they want. They want it, here, take it. What are the pros and cons of folding? It is over quickly. Folding is, I want this cup over here, or you want this cup, here, take it. You're asking for it. Rather than me trying to resolve a conflict, I'm just giving up. It causes long-term resentment, yes. Often you see passive-aggressive behavior if you're the one folding. And often we think, oh, I'm going to give in now, hoping the other person will reciprocate. But often they don't reciprocate because they got rewarded for you folding. They got positive reinforcement for you folding. So where you hope that they will, often they don't. And it does stifle innovation. And then 50-50 or compromise. Isn't compromise the best solution? What are the pros and cons of compromise? Run, and there's a time and a place for folding. If you don't care about something, you might want to fold and hold your hand. Yep, that's fine too. Compromise, no one gets exactly what they want. Thank you. And it depends on what's being compromised. And there's a time and a place where compromise or flee, force, folding are the best solution. This example here actually is a picture of our McGill student who runs our youth initiative, co-chairs our youth initiative. Theodora Sauvé is a law student now with her boyfriend, Alexei. They were going to make each other a nice meal. Alexei was going to make veal lemon, and Thea was going to make a lemon sorbet. They only had one lemon. So they said, okay, let's cut the lemon in half. And then they realized when they're eating their food, it doesn't really taste as lemony as we would have hoped. They only had half the lemon. And they talked about it, and they realized that Alexei only needed the juice for his recipe, and Thea, for her sorbet, really only needed the zest. They took the time to understand each other. They could have put all the zest or all the juice in the recipe. So this is a classic compromise story, 50-50, where they only had half the juice and half the zest. By the way, I asked the question of a group of 700 CEOs, YPOers in a room when I did this with 700, and about a third of them say that they use flee as their go-to way. Surprising, these are CEOs who have the power to hire and fire. About a third of them said they use force or power, and about a third say they compromise. Very few admit to folding. But we know culture starts at the top of an organization. And if the CEO is fleeing or avoiding conflict, you figure that most people in that company are walking on eggshells around conflict and avoiding conflict. If the CEO is using force and is a bully, there's probably a bully culture in that company. So something to be aware of, to think about. So which way we deal with conflict is often a function of the issue, the relationship, power, and how much time we have. And the fifth way of dealing with conflict we're going to be talking about soon is nonflict. So now I'm going to ask Jessica to launch poll number 1. Jessica, if you could launch poll number 1, which is, what is your most commonly used conflict resolution style? If you could please answer that. And it's anonymous. We're just going to see from the group. You have to choose one of them as your go-to way. Okay, let's close the poll now just for the interest of time. Let's see what we've got. Jessica. Sorry if those of you, a few of you who didn't vote yet. So about a third of you leave from conflict. 5% of you guys are not forcers. Only one of you say use force as your go-to way. About 14% fold, and majority, well, another third of you use compromise, and then 14% use other. Alrighty, thank you very much. Interesting poll. Often the people that brought us up, be it our parents or whoever brought us up, has an impact on our framing on how we deal with conflict. So reflect on how your parents dealt with conflict. If you were brought up by two parents, in my case, I was lucky enough to have two parents. My mother was a forcer, my father was a folder. She would yell and scream and he would fold. And if I didn't fold, I would probably feel back then in those days a spanking. So I associated conflict with fear, with pain. So what do you do when you associate something with pain? You want to avoid it. My go-to way would be avoiding conflict, fleeing from conflict. My wife calls it turtling. I would get into my protective shell. No one could hurt me. I don't make eye contact. So now let's launch poll number 2. Are you more like your mother, father, neither, both, or someone else who might have brought you up? Some that might require a little more thought, I understand. Yeah, let's end the poll just from a time perspective. We have a majority here. So we've got 27% like mother and only 9% like your father, but a third like both, and about a quarter like neither, and 9% someone else who brought you up. Awesome, thank you. Interesting quote, which summarized 2 years of business school. Our friend Albert Einstein. So often when we have a problem, be it a business problem or a conflict, we're quick to assume the problem without understanding the real underlying problem or the real underlying conflict. So Einstein would spend 55 minutes thinking about it, then the solution becomes evident more often than not, 5 minutes on the solution. So half of our cases back in the day were, what's the real underlying conflict? Sales are down, that's a symptom. Why are sales down? So what we've been doing up until now is self-awareness. Why do we do what we do, and why do we feel, and why others might feel the way they do? So now we're going to get into non-conflict, which is a 5th way of dealing with conflict. Alrighty, and thanks, Marco. Those aren't the only options, and now one is another option. So non-conflict way, 3-step process. Here are the steps. Inspired by our friend Albert Einstein, step 1 is to understand yourself and your partner. Where one partner, your partner is the person you're in conflict with, shares their view of the conflict, including their facts and their feelings around the conflict. The other person is going to actively listen to them, like we did in our breakout, mirror the essence of what they heard in their own words, then ask, did I understand you well, like we did earlier, but then ask, is there anything else? And more often than not, there's something else. And only when they feel listened to, when you feel listened to and respected, are you open to think what the other thing might be. You might not even have been aware of it until you heard yourself mirror back. And then ask to understand, well, is there anything else? And you keep going until there's nothing else. And the person keeps mirroring you every time you come up with something else without defending. And when you share your facts and feelings, it's to do your facts and feelings without attacking the other person. It's this is what happened, this is how I felt, versus why did you do that? Because that would make the other person defensive. Or you shouldn't have done that, right? It's sharing your facts and feelings. The other person will going to mirror back the essence without being defensive, because you'll have a turn to share your own. And then the first person is going to share what's important to me. What's important to me that I feel is listened to, that I feel respected, that we keep our commitment, whatever is important to you, right? And then you switch, and then you get to share your facts and feelings. The other person will mirror you and will ask to understand, well, is there anything else? And then share what's important to you. So that's step 1. When we go through this, we often find, number 1, we build trust. And we also build understanding. We discover commonality more often than not, because people are people. We often want the same thing. Doesn't matter what culture, where you're from, we all want to feel respected. We all want to feel understood. We all want to feel safe. If it's a personal relationship, we all want to feel loved. Great. Next question is now, next step is step 2 is to understand your shared reality. Now we discuss together what's our real underlying conflict here versus the symptoms of the conflict. What's the real underlying conflict here? You might have to go back to step one if you didn't get it all out, and that's fine. Then you come back and discuss together. Maybe it's a lack of communication. What's our real underlying conflict? Next question from positive psychology: what's working well for us? What can we appreciate about about our partner? This puts us in a better frame of mind to then go on to resolve it. Even if it's just that we're willing to talk about it. What's working well for us? Next question: what is our worst case scenario if we cannot resolve this conflict, and how would that feel? We discuss that together. Worst case is case of a business conflict. Maybe I get fired, or we both get fired, or the company doesn't do well if we're partners. Maybe it goes down. How would it feel? Awful. If I'm the one having to fire someone, I'm going to have to find someone else. There's no guarantee they're going to be better. I have to train them, and no guarantee. If I'm the one getting fired, I have to look for a new job. That may or may not be a great thing. Personal relationship, no. We grow further and further apart. In my case, I have to go visit my kids in California. How would that feel? Pretty awful. I live in Montreal, 6 hours away, 8 hours away. Alrighty, that's from social psychologists say that half the people are more motivated by the worst case. And from change management, often you need a real or perceived crisis to take action toward change. So the next question is, next step is co-create. Step 3, now we visualize our best case scenario, and how would that feel? What's our ideal reality, and how would that feel? Visualize that. Ideal reality is we enjoy working together. We bring out the best in each other. We, as a couple, we don't try to change each other. We help each other, support each other, be the best version of us that we could be. How would that feel? Amazing. We have fun together. We accomplish the company goals, and we all do well. Awesome. Then we discuss together what are the obstacles to achieve our ideal reality. We might write down all the obstacles. I've done this with Palestinians and Israelis. There are 2 pages or 3 pages of obstacles. What are the obstacles to achieve our ideal reality? And then we review the obstacles and we say, okay, which of these can we control or influence? Let's not bother with the ones we cannot control, but the ones we can control, what could we do to overcome them? Followed by an action plan. Who's going to do what and when? So those are the steps of the Nonflict way. Ron mentioned, and any question on this process, put it in the chat. Ron mentioned it is on Alexa, so and it's all on a sheet that you're going to get after, as well detailed in a book. So you could also, after you just enable the free Alexa app, if you could put it on your phone, or if you have one of those devices, you could say, Alexa, open the Nonflict Coach.
Okay, here's Nonflict Coach. Welcome to the Nonflict Coach. I can help you learn various concepts of the Nonflict way. I can guide you through the process, or you can continue where you left off. How can I help?
Guide me.
I can help you practice on your own. Assist with 2 people in conflict. How would you like me to help?
With 2 people.
This will walk you through the various steps of the Nonflict way by helping you work through a conflict with someone else. What is your name?
Stephen.
Yes or no? Is your name Stephen?
Yes.
What is your partner's name?
Daniel.
Yes or no? Can you confirm your partner's name is Daniel?
Yes.
Throughout this guide, you can either skip to the next part or try it out. To skip, you can simply say skip. If you want to pause the skill to follow the step, you can say pause. If you start to practice and find that the skill exits, you can continue. To continue, you say Alexa, open Nonflict Coach and continue. Shall we get started?
Yes.
Stephen, please look at Daniel in the eyes and tell Daniel your facts and feelings about the conflict. Daniel, please actively listen to Stephen without interrupting, and when Stephen is finished, repeat back the essence of what was shared, asking, did I understand you well? Is there anything else? Repeat this until there is nothing else. Would you like to skip to the next step or pause the guide?
Alexa, exit. So that gives you an idea. So you could have a third-party independent coach just listening to you or walking you through it, and then it'll stop until while you actually work out and answer these questions. So in summary, Nonflict is a fifth way of dealing with conflict. I'll share with you a link to get the Nonflict book, or at least an ebook. And yes, ChatGPT is going to be incorporated. Actually, we have a collaboration with a friendly figure, cartoon type figure, that's going to be able to. Yes, Daniel, I'm glad you're relieved. Okay, you're going to put on the spot. When we have a 3-hour workshop, a longer workshop, we actually would demonstrate it with a volunteer from the front. Maybe you would have come to the front and we'd go through a real conflict that you have. And then we would do breakout rooms where you would then go resolve it, one of your real conflicts. Unfortunately, in the 1-hour format, it's hard to do, but feel free, but please try it this week. Go through the process yourself. You'll have a sheet shortly. If it is an important relationship, an important conflict, it's worth taking the time to go through Nonflict. I've seen it work on the toughest conflicts, and I've put it to the test in a Palestinian refugee camp, and I'm a Canadian Jew, and seeing these women transform from being very hostile to me to be willing to make peace with their Jewish Israeli neighbors. So I've seen it in some tough situations. I'm just going to put the next survey up on the chat. If you can, take a minute to fill it out. And for those of you who don't have to leave on the hour, we're going to stick around and answer any questions you might have or any comments you might have. I just want to respect the time for folks that only scheduled for 1 hour. Shivgami, did you want to speak? Go ahead.
Yeah.
If that's what you're asking, I'm not sure.
Because I studied throughout my life up to 29 years and working with the women's colleges and women's respecting myself. But this first marriage brought me to Canada here. Luckily, I have been educated, but to put my self-esteem, as you said in the beginning, that was the first marriage, and that was the first intense relationship I had, and married and came. That marriage brought a third day my dad's heart attack, and after that, after coming to Canada, lived here for 19 years and raised with my son with the heart problem and fixed his heart surgeries. Reading Canada was to do my internship in psychology, but it did not progress because of my 50% of mark sheet. I said I went and took the equivalence, and I did esthetician program to learn more about skin problems. That gave me, and he gave me a lot of volatile problems. That is a political problem. Second, he has an inferiority complex, and
Shivgami, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but just given the top of the hour, I just want to show us 2 slides and stay on.
Copy a mock. But it was a Concordia University calculus, and 99% marks he got. But when it comes to
Shivgami, do you have a question just before? Because I wanted to just show 2 more slides before people have to leave.
How do you overcome? Because I would like to bring this to kids. I want to overcome this, because this is an international cultural problem. This is, I want to overcome, bring this to kids out.
I could bring it to kids, did you say?
From this conflict, I want to bring this to kids out.
I'm not sure if I understand.
I'm saying that because of this international cultural diversity, this Canada, and because of the international cultural language and the 3 language dimension, I want to bring out these 2 kids. That's why the problem is not solving.
Got it. So what I'd suggest for any internal conflict or external conflict, try this process, and actually you could reach out to me and we'll talk about it in more detail. All right. And
Thank
we're
you very
focused
much.
on youth to be able to bring this to people around the world. We have a youth initiative so that we could deal with or learn more constructive conflict resolution skills earlier in our life. So I just want to just share a slide quickly that you now have the tools. You're now peacemakers. Feel free, here's my email address that you could follow up with. The key is to practice it ideally this week. Read the book I'm going to share with you, an ebook. You could get it online on Amazon if you want a hard copy, then share it with others. If you want to take here's a QR code. This QR code, if you want to take a screenshot, will actually give you a copy of the book, a handout sheet for a conflict that when you're with someone else, or an internal conflict, as well as the audiobook link. So we have an audiobook and the hard copy. If you wanted a Spanish version, it's on Amazon, as well as Marathi version for some of you might come from India where you speak that. And I'm going to stop sharing, and Ron will go ahead. Ron, say a few words, and I'll stay on a little longer if anyone wants to chat.
Thank you so much, Steve. It is a lot to cram into 1 hour, but I think you did an excellent job of giving us a taste of what this can be. And having gone through the process, and the book is extremely easy to read and very, very easy to implement. So it's very practical, and thank you, Steve, for trying to give us a taste of that in just an hour. And honestly, if you only had another half hour or another hour, you would be fully able to use the Nonflict method. So I encourage you all to. So thank you very much, Steve, for joining us today and for leading today's discussion. It's really interesting, Steve, what you said about um, Einstein's quote about spending 55 minutes on the problem, only 5 minutes on the solution, because it's a little plug here for our programs at McGill, but our executive programs are based on Ginsberg's philosophy of reflection. This idea that to be good managers and good leaders, we need time to reflect on what is going on in the world, what is going on in our organization, and spending, maybe 90% of that time thinking and reflecting, which is so hard to do as a manager, as we all know, because you're interrupted constantly and meetings constantly. But this idea of reflection is imbued in every one of our executive programs, including our partners for this series, which is the International Masters for Health Leadership and the Executive MBA, the McGill HSA Executive MBA, which all use this very unique reflection method of education, which is quite unique to McGill. So thanks again, Steve. Thank you, everyone from all over the world. If you want to stick around for a couple more minutes and ask a few more questions, you're more than welcome to. We'll stay online for another while. And I want to invite you to join us in May. You'll get an email with the Zoom link for our next Impact Series webinar, which will feature Dr. Anita Novak. And it ties in really well to Steve's topic about Nonflict, which is this idea of empathy. And so Dr. Anita Novak will be joining us. She just published a book last week on empathy, the power of empathy, and how empathy can be used to improve morale and productivity in organizations. So I think it's a nice dovetail into the next topic for May. So I hope you'll join us for that as well. In the meantime, I want to wish everyone who has to leave now health and happiness wherever you are in the world, and I hope to see you again in May for our next series. Thank you very much. Thanks, Steve.